What's up, you guys? I am relaxing at home. It's been a ridiculously busy week for me, and I finally hit a point where I felt sick, and I've got my goats out grazing for free, and we're just enjoying a little calming. I'm finally feeling better a few hours later after laying in bed. Um, Anyhow, I'm thinking about this Amy Coney Barrett testifying how she's dealt with threats to her family, what have you, and I'm thinking about how it's unnatural, it's unconstitutional, it's inconsistent with the early days of our founding, and that she should even be held to the standard that she's being held to. So let me talk about that real quick here. So, for those of you that don't know it, in the early days of the United States, no one saw it as though the courts were the final arbiter of the meaning of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton hinted at something like that a little bit in Federalist 78, but even there he didn't claim that. John Marshall claimed that the courts should be reviewing the constitutionality of laws, or in other words, if the law is in conflict with the supreme law, which is the Constitution, that he could not be a tool in enforcing it because he would be violating his own oath of office, and so therefore he would be then contributing to the destruction of that to which he had sworn an oath. So the first thing they always did was look at the constitutionality, and a lot of people say that's the origin of judicial review. That's just cute. John Marshall did not claim to be the final arbiter of the meaning of the Constitution for everyone else. He did have moments that I don't think were great. A lot of people tended to perceive what the judges would do as though it was the meaning of the Constitution, unfortunately. So that's where you get, towards the end of Thomas Jefferson's life, the description of the courts as the little worm eating through the Constitution, right? So, because basically, if the courts wouldn't enforce something, or would claim something that was constitutional that wasn't constitutional when it came before them, then everybody else looked at it and said, well, okay, cool, we got away with that one. Because the nature of the three-part system, right? Just by nature of there being a three-part system, it's assumed that if you can get it through the courts, you're good to go. Of course, Jefferson proved early on that there is a fourth step that everyone forgets, which is that the executive branch has to carry out the sentences wherever the courts make a decision. And so Jefferson proved to us that the executive may at times say, yeah, no, I'm going to commute that sentence. I'm not going to carry that sentence out. That's unconstitutional. The whole law that you guys put these people in prison for or in jail for is unconstitutional, so I'm going to undo it. So really, does the buck stop at the courts historically? No, it doesn't. Now, Jefferson, when you look at him, so he's one of the ones who people like to talk about him defying the courts and stuff like that. Whatever, dudes. Look, Jefferson, what he did is he looked at the Constitution and he said, I swore an oath to the Constitution, and nothing about my oath tells me that I'm allowed to excuse my oath to the Constitution if the courts say it's okay, right? I'm paraphrasing, of course. So he says, I get into office, I'm looking at the text of the Constitution, it says this, but all these people have been sentenced for this, which violates the Constitution. I'm not going to enforce it. I'm going to turn around and commute their sentence. I'm going to go ahead and pardon them. I'm going to have them get out, right? So this is Jefferson, his version of refusing to do what the courts said to do was because he would look at the text and he'd say, yeah, no, we're not allowed to be doing that. The Constitution doesn't allow for us to be punishing people for these things, doesn't allow us to be enforcing these laws. So now you get to Jackson, and Jackson is known for defying the courts. But now Jackson, the way he defies the courts, just his whole personality in general, what you suddenly get with Jackson is what Dickinson would have described as an artful ruler. In other words, someone who expands his power and refuses to accept the power of others and comes up with clever explanations for why he's doing it. Are you guys surrounding me? I'm getting surrounded by goats here. So, anyhow, that's Jackson. He doesn't point to the actual text of the Constitution. He points to the concepts of the Constitution and to these feelings about what the Constitution should be and these concepts about the people's will and stuff like that. And, his good ideas and says that's what we're going to do. And no, I'm not going to do what the judges are telling me to do. Or no, I don't care if your explanation for what you're doing is based off the actual text of the Constitution. The federal government supreme, and the president is in charge of the federal government and the supremacy of the federal government. So I'm just going to force you to go along with it. So the courts are still getting defied, but it's a different flavor of the decisions of the courts are still getting undone, but it's a different flavor of undoing the decisions of the courts now. It's this. My ideas are so dang good, and the people's will is so dang good, and I'm so dang popular the way I got elected. This is the way it's going to be. It's one of those kind of things, okay? Same thing with Lincoln. Lincoln, you get a similar sort of concept. Buchanan, prior to Lincoln, so he was our genius. He was the first one who promoted the idea, out and out promoted the idea that if the courts decide it, then it must be constitutional, and we need to go along with it. And really, Buchanan was, I can't remember what the term was, but they had Northerners who were Southern sympathizers. Buchanan was one of those. He was tired of the Northerners harassing the Southern sympathizers. There was a guy who moved up to the Northern states, a non-slave state, and I think we call it voluntary manumission, or basically whenever you have a slave who you've taken with you into a non-slave state, the idea was you couldn't legally force that slave then to follow you back out of the state, because it's illegal to have a slave in that state in the first place. And so the second this Southerner took and moved and lived in a free state, for him to turn around and treat his slave as his former slave as though he was still his slave was a violation of that state's laws, because you weren't allowed to have slaves in that state. So that's where you get your Judge Dredd or your Dred Scott. I don't know why I always say Judge Dredd. That's ridiculous. I've only watched that movie like twice in my life. That's where you get your Dred Scott ruling. And Buchanan really wanted that. He colluded with the courts. He wanted that to happen. He wanted the Northerners to back off and leave the Southerners alone. It didn't work worth a dang. So the courts, again, being treated as the final arbiters, finally being treated as the final arbiters of the meaning of the Constitution. The first case, from what I understand, where President blatantly promoted that idea, and it was a terrible case. It's a bad example. So if that's the foundation of this doctrine, which isn't in the Constitution at all, but rather it was come up with by someone who wanted to go ahead and be pro-slavery, then you've got, honestly, you've got a bad start to this idea. Now, it's back and forth. The Dred Scott ruling was such a frustration to Congress that after winning the Civil War, when they wrote the 14th Amendment, the fifth section of the 14th Amendment, fifth section anyhow, they say that Congress shall have the power to make the rules for enforcing these. And the 14th Amendment, if you really read it, it's written like a resolution to the case of the Civil War. So it's not like the 13th Amendment creates the new doctrine of freeing the slaves. 15th Amendment creates the new doctrine of you can't, prohibit voting based on race. And so the 14th Amendment is basically, it reads like a sentence. It reads like a resolution to a case. I think you would call it a tort law type case or something like that. But that last sentence, that last section, the fifth section says, Congress shall have the power to enforce this. It doesn't give any powers, no new powers whatsoever to the judges. Now, judges grabbed a hold of that later on. So this started happening towards the 1890s or so. I think I'm saying that right. Where the judges look and they say, well, really, what's the aspect of it? It's in the first section. It says, the due process. They start calling it the substantive due process, which is just a copy and paste of some text that already existed in the Fifth Amendment, which again, I think Barron v. Baltimore was wrong. But Barron v. Baltimore, I think that John Marshall felt the pressure of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson had just defied him the year prior. And so Barron v. Baltimore, so this is interesting with the Amy Coney Barrett case, because hi Inga, this is my first goat ever that I started milking. We got so many goats now, don't we, Inga? So anyhow, that's apparently there was pressure on John Marshall. He felt like the court was having a real identity crisis, because this Jackson guy, he's defying the courts for no reason other than his nice explanations, or his powerful explanations, or the power of the people, or the power of my popularity. I was elected by this much. I don't care what the Constitution says. Here's the general concept of the Constitution. The general concept is sufficient. Who cares what the actual text says, right? So that gives you a decent idea of, the courts. The way Hamilton describes them in 78, Federalist 78, they have neither sword nor purse. These guys are literally incapable of defending themselves, right? And Jackson's just a bully. I'm sorry. That dude's a bully. He liked dueling. I'm sorry. I just don't trust someone like that. So now you get to 1925, and there's already this history of the judges starting to interpret the Constitution and people taking it more seriously. They've snuck their way in, even though they weren't trusted that much after the end of the Civil War, right? And former President Taft, is now the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he says, he approaches, now he's a friend of like Rockefeller or Carnegie, those kind of guys, by the way. So he's behind their cause. But he approaches Coolidge, and he approaches the Congress, and he starts making this sales pitch for, hey, let's make things more efficient, you guys. Let's make it to where the Supreme Court doesn't have to keep taking all these appeals of cases and stuff like that have nothing to do with deciding constitutional questions. Let's make it to where we're supposed to just be focusing on answering constitutional questions for everyone. It'll be efficient. It'll save us money. It'll cut down on the costs of appeals. It'll basically define the Constitution quickly for us and help everybody to know what the Constitution is. Here we are. We're 150 years into the United States existence, and suddenly we're like, okay, we need somebody to tell us what the Constitution means. Seriously, we haven't figured it out after 150 years what the Constitution means? Look, I can tell you where it started going away. Andrew Jackson screwed it up. He was a bully. People started getting scared to interpret the Constitution for themselves, as we see with John Marshall. That case, by the way, Barron v. Baltimore, was brought by William Wirt, the longest serving ever Attorney General after he had retired from being the Attorney General. Comes and brings this case of Barron v. Baltimore. He's not a slacker of an attorney. He's really good. And the entire Supreme Court just says, Fifth Amendment doesn't apply to the states. It only applies to the federal government. The people's consent did not approve such text. It approved such text for the First Amendment, but not for the Second through the 10th. Second through the 8th, whatever you want to say. Second through the 8th reads like blanket prohibitions. This period shall not happen from any level of government in the United States territory. Okay? And I think that's the way most of the founders really understood it, but it's besides the point how they understood it. I don't care how they understood it. If they forgot to write it down and present it for ratification for the consent of the governed, then it exists the way they did bother to write it down and present it for ratification. That's what's got approved. So, and John Marshall probably would have, the court probably would have taken it more seriously, but they're dealing with this defiant president who refuses to follow what they're talking about. Not based on the text of the Constitution, but just based on, hey, I'm popular and this is what the people want and I'm in charge around here and the federal government is supreme and that's all there is to it. And so whatever we say goes, right? Okay, so anyhow, sorry, I got distracted. 1925, though, they decided to codify it. That now what's going to happen from now on is, how the 10th Amendment says powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states or to the people respectively. But it doesn't say who's allowed to define that, which means, therefore, that power then obviously is one of the things that does remain with the states and the people, right? Duh. Go figure, right? So I'm always pointing to Article 4 and 5 emphasizes the state powers. Article 6 emphasizes the powers of officers of government, which really is part of the people, respectively. And then 7 through the early amendments emphasizes the power of the people. So the power of the people, they should, they called it the manly spirit, the manly vigilance, the manly resistance to tyranny and encroachments on their liberty, right? Yes, this power was reserved to the people. But now suddenly in 1925, they're declaring from now on, the courts are going to tell us what's not delegated to the federal government, what is delegated to the federal government, and what the states aren't allowed to do and what the people aren't allowed to do. So just in case you thought you understood the Constitution, you didn't really understand the Constitution, we're going to start telling you what it is. That's really what they're codifying, okay? They get more aggressive in Cooper v. Aaron, which I think is late 50s, early 60s, something like that. But that's besides the point. I'm not an expert on the history of the courts, but I'm not a slacker on it. Honestly, credit to my dad. He knew I was studying things like the Federalist Papers and Ezra Taft Benson talks, and had a friend going to law school back 10 years ago or so, and he got me that Ted Stewart book, 7 Pivotal Court Decisions, basically. Some of the main ones that are really annoying, that change the way we understand the Constitution. But I will say one of the big ones that's not a court decision at all is the Judges Act. This idea we're going to have the judges start defining the Constitution for us. And that is, I think, unfair. We already talked about how John Marshall and that court felt pressure from Jackson. Now, imagine if the whole country saw that court as the final arbiter of the meaning of the Constitution, and all these constitutional questions kept coming before them. You think that we have scary people nowadays showing up to Amy Coney Barrett's house? I think it would have been even scarier back then. But still the same, it's not fair. It's not fair to hold the judges to interpreting the Constitution for us. Constitutionally, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to. That power isn't granted to them. Everything that's in the Constitution that's legally binding on the rest of us has a very specific procedure with checks and balances. Article 7, Clause 2, both houses of Congress plus the president approve it by simple majorities. If not, 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress, and it's approved anyhow. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, the president, and this is a very simple power, it's just basic treaties, was the only thing that was ever meant to be done. President proposes the treaty with the consent and advice of the Senate. As long as they get 2/3, it becomes a treaty, right? Which has limited application. Okay, and then Article 5 has to be 2/3 of both houses of federal Congress, and then 3/4 of the state legislatures. This is what it has to be in order to get something officially passed. Yet 5 out of 9 judges, and you're going to call that, and it's not even codified. Where does it tell us what the procedure is? Where does it include it? In Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws and the treaties which shall be made in pursuance thereof, plus the rulings where the judges decide to tell you, just in case you thought you understood the Constitution but you didn't really understand it. No, it doesn't say anything like that at all. So it's an unfair expectation that we're putting on 9 justices. It's unacceptable. It's unfair to them. It's unfair to the people. It's unfair to everyone. But it's, we're dishonest people. We need an explainer, and I've already pointed this out. Historically, it's very normal for tyrannical empires to start off. They start wanting their technocrats. They start wanting their entangling alliances. But it's not the most legitimate looking thing in the world. So as John Dickinson says, all artful rulers seek to expand their powers and give them as much semblance of legitimacy as possible, or legality, right? So they usually then bring in some kind of sophists, some kind of explainers, some kind of official sounding experts that tell you why what this ruler is doing is allowed in their kingdom anyhow, or in their empire. And in the United States case, what that is it's judicial supremacy. The Supreme Court has been used to replace this same old pattern that's been around forever. And then we get the entangling alliances just as ever, and we get the technocrats that they don't have to have any enumerated powers. You just justify them. You make it sound like, they're so expert, you guys just got to follow what they're saying because they're experts, right? So, just a little rant on I heard Andrew Branca pointing out, and I think Mark Levin and others too, the court's compromised. We can't count on them to be interpreting the Constitution for us anyhow. They're clearly compromised. Look what's happening to them. Look at the way they're being harassed by these leftist bullies and stuff like that. And yeah, it was an unfair expectation to put on them in the first place, and it was unconstitutional. It's unfair to be subjecting the whole country to it too. So the whole thing's just a bad deal. So that's my thoughts. Thanks for listening, guys. See you.